morning. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Liz, who's going to start. And we've left a little bit of time for discussion at the end. I think we'll perhaps take one or two questions if we have time as we go, and see how we get on.
Good afternoon. My talk's going to be very much an overview of the options for someone once they've got what they think is a promising imaging biomarker. I'm really starting from the point of view of an academic development of a biomarker. You've had research funding for it, you've published. What are the ways that you might go forward? Might call this commercialization, but I mean, not everybody is an apprentice candidate. We're not all money-making machines. A more realistic motivation is just wanting to see your work used. So often people do a lot of work, they get the publications, they get promoted or whatever, but the work that they've done has never actually got out there. It hasn't been used, which is very satisfying in itself. There were some recurring themes, or there are some recurring themes. You'll recognise some things I say in this talk from what people were saying this morning, though perhaps in slightly different language. So, an overview. We'll start with the definition of this biomarker, look at a roadmap, who you might sell it to, what sort of format that your product might have, special features for pharmaceutical research. This is a session from a pharma company. And funding before bringing it all together at the end. So biomarker, it's one of those terms that people bandy about, and perhaps we aren't all using exactly the same meaning for it. So I've put this definition up here. Measurement of a defined characteristic. It can be an indicator of various things, normal processes, or non-normal processes, and response to intervention. This bit at the bottom, in the olden days, biomarkers had to actually be a sort of biological process. So something that you measured from imaging itself would not have been defined as a biomarker, but that's changed. And you can actually have a measurement made from imaging, a radiographic measurement, and still call it a biomarker. How you use your biomarker might vary. The one that most people are happiest with is the diagnostic biomarker, which you might test in two groups of subjects, one with a disease and one without, and be able to distinguish them using this biomarker. I've put these other examples up just to make it, well, emphasize the point that that doesn't mean it's going to work in other ways of using biomarkers. Just because something can tell two patient groups apart does not immediately mean that it's going to be great for monitoring disease progress or regression in an individual. You need to have a clear idea of what you're actually using it for, as well as what it is. Now this is a quite recently published roadmap all about imaging biomarkers. It's actually for cancer studies, but it's more widely applicable than that. And so what we've got here is three types of thing that one's wanting to look at. Technical validation, the biological and clinical validation or evaluation, and cost effectiveness. First stage that goes before either of these gaps I've got marked here is your basic evaluation of it. If you can show that it works, you get over what they call on here the translational gap 1, and you've got a biomarker that could be used in clinical research. And it's this process of going over translational gap 1 that Sarah's going to be talking about in the next talk. And then there's another gap, different sort of research. Very generally speaking, it's moving out from a small group with one centre to being applicable in many centres, you could then go on to use the technique in healthcare. So as I say, this is a simplification. This is of the roadmap. There's a detailed version. I've actually got a PDF file online showing all the details. So already on here, we've got an idea of 2 potential markets for your biomarker. Clinical research, preclinical research. So this is research into a disease or treatment of it. The other one is actually in healthcare. So this is, it could be for diagnosis, it could be monitoring, it could be for therapy, and then there's a number of places you could be using it: primary care, hospital-based or home-based techniques. Quite a few markets already. The next one, consumer health. So this is healthcare products that people buy independently of a healthcare professional. And it's something you go into Boots the chemist and purchase. So, I mean, that might seem a bit ambitious for something that's a technical image analysis thing on imaging that's only done in a few places. But I keep seeing this advert on television at the moment, Ancestry DNA. That's the advert where the chap says he thought he was half Polish, half Caribbean, but it turned out he's actually a Viking. That's a mass market application for DNA analysis that, well, certainly I, in my unimaginative way, would never have envisaged as taking off. So there's that. And then, not really a surprise, as I said, this is a session organised by GSK. Another market would be for pharmaceutical research. And there are 2 main areas that are of interest to the pharma companies. They might want to use things in drug development or companion tests, which we have mentioned again earlier this morning. So I'll come back in a few moments to look in more detail at these 2 features. But I wanted to just move on now from who you might get to use your technique to about how you might go about offering the technique to them. In a non-exhaustive list, just a variety of things, from the hands-off licensing to somebody else to do everything, going into partnership. For example, if your technique is particularly associated with a particular imaging technique, might partner with a scanner manufacturer. You might have a whole new medical device that includes the software if it's a new way of doing things. And then at the bottom here, doing things as a service. Sell the image analysis or the imaging and the image analysis as a service. And this bottom one is something that tends to happen in pharma. And in all of this, it's good to partner with someone who's already experienced, who's already gone down the commercialization route. And that's something to think about, because you want to be able to convince people that you will be able to encourage people to buy your product. And if you've got somebody who's already established in the market, be it a distribution network or by having a product, that's a good start. The other thing is it's jolly difficult. There are regulatory requirements for medical devices. We've heard the 510K thing being mentioned a couple of times this morning. CE marking, easy if you know how. And a good point here is to know that there are companies that specialise in medical device regulation. That's their raison d'etre, and they can really help you. And you need to think about this earlier than you might think you need to think about it, because, for example, for CE marking, you need to prepare a technical file and keep all sorts of information going and you don't want to be trying to catch up on that later. So what sort of things are pharma companies doing? Well, in drug development, they run clinical trials basically to decide if the drug is working and if it's safe. And when using a biomarker, it's quite demanding. You want to get the answers right. It's common to control the image acquisition too. You don't just pull in images that people have already acquired for some other reason. You control things so that you get exactly the right images, you know what's actually going on. And that's why these trials are often run by contract research organisations, CROs. So for your new biomarker, you might partner with someone who's experienced in this area, or think about establishing a new one. So it's really it's rather different from making a gadget or a device. There are some other things to think about. And actually what service you provide as a CRO, it depends on what you're doing, as ever. Going from a full imaging and analysis service, or perhaps just making sure that the studies are set up properly. Companion tests, these arise from developments towards more personalised, individualised medicine. The thing is here that drugs are being developed that only work, and they're known only to work, in a proportion of the population. So you need to have a test that will identify those people first, so that only the people who you know are actually going to respond to your drug are given it. And so you have this kind of pair of products, your drug and the thing that tells people that it's sensible to prescribe it to the individuals. So here we've got this route. If someone's a responder, then we can include it in these people in the trial. If you're lucky, you might also be able to use that same test to assess response as you go on, but obviously not always. So funding. We're starting from a point of an academic research project here. It may be necessary to do a little bit more research work before moving on to something that is actually going to have an end point of almost marketing your product. And that's where the pre-competitive collaborations come in. There's a very large set of work going on from the Innovative Medicines Initiative. And I'll just skip down to the bottom here. Then there's sets of schemes for funding the last bit of work before you've actually moving on to sell a product. And there's quite a number of these. Eurostars, which is a European thing. I4I, that one's a UK one. It's on the NIHR website, Small Business Research Initiative. Eurostars, I'll just show this quickly and point out, even if you're not intending to go for a Eurostars project, they've got wonderful guidelines. So I would recommend going and looking at this and downloading all their guidelines, because if you're going to apply for another similar sort of scheme, something that's leading up to the last step before commercialization, I reckon you'll find hints and tips in those guidelines that you'll find useful for any application. And as well as the sort of standing schemes that are having call after call after call, there are special responsive mode things every so often, and this is just a couple of examples of things that are currently open. This is a small business research initiative, one at the top, where they're wanting you to do projects in cancer care, and medical imaging is specifically mentioned there. And an Innovate UK example, and here we are, all these buzzwords here, precision medicine, for example. So to summarize, there are several possible routes, both in terms of who you might want to use your product and the way in which you do that. Pharmaceutical applications sometimes get overlooked when we're thinking about healthcare, but they are ideal and well suited to quantitative imaging biomarkers. Collaborations and partnerships are important. I think I would put vital, actually. That's what it's all about. We saw some examples this morning of the new approaches to innovation taken by some big companies which are opening themselves up to getting ideas from outside which previously they might have just developed internally. And investigate possibilities sooner rather than later, so you know where you're going. The sooner you know where you're going and the better idea of how you have of where you're going, then the better it should work. So just one last slide, which is my acknowledgement for and thanks to GSK. Thank you.